Just talking musicals with you. Hello, I'm Lesley Ann Knight and welcome to Just Talking Musicals. In the last episode, we delved into the tale of how Jerome Kern and Oscar Hammerstein II came to create a musical out of Pulitzer Prize-winning author Edna Ferber's novel Showboat. Having successfully talked producer Florence Ziegfeld into taking on their venture, they were all lined up to open the show at the Ziegfeld Theatre, one of the finest and most stylishly Art Deco theatres on Broadway in 1927. The 1920s was a decade of hope and prosperity on Broadway, and Ziegfeld and his fashionable revues, brimming with beautiful girls in astonishingly glamorous outfits, were all the rage. On the face of it, Showboat had appeared to be just the ticket for one of Ziegfeld's big production numbers. But he hadn't counted on Kern and Hammerstein's progressive ideas about creating not just a big show, but one that had an actual plot with songs which were woven into the story. The full opening cast numbered over 100, and together with Oscar Hammerstein's background as working as stage manager for his uncle Arthur Hammerstein, Oscar naturally took over direction of most of the production. So, in creating this show, Kern and Hammerstein held a unique position which enabled them to shape every aspect of the piece, taking control of not just the music, the lyrics and the dialogue, but stage direction as well. The leading roles were taken by Norma Terrace, playing Magnolia Hawkes, Howard Marsh as Gaylord Ravenel, Helen Morgan as Julie Laverne, Jules Bledsoe as Joe, Charles Winninger as Captain Andy Hawkes, Edna May Oliver as his wife, Parthy Ann, Sammy White and Eva Puck as Frank and Ellie, the comedy couple, and Tess Gardella as Queenie. For some 20 years, Florence Ziegfeld had presented his audiences with shows that had a huge cast, complete with comic songs, dances, beautiful music, and line after line of beautiful girls in extraordinary costumes. In short, Ziegfeld represented entertainment with a capital E. On the face of it, this new musical play, this Showboat, may have looked as if it had many of the ingredients of a famous Ziegfeld show on paper. But that was really where the similarity ended. Showboat, it seemed, not only had a fully fledged story, it had heart, and tons of it too. And as it turned out, it was set to become known as the first true musical play. But when the great Ziegfeld realised what he'd actually signed up for, the story goes that he wasn't so convinced that this was what his public really wanted. But when they came to open at the National Theatre in Washington, D.C. on Tuesday the 15th of November 1927 for a pre-broadway tryout, one thing was certain, that at just over 4 hours running time, this show was too long. Just before curtain up at 8:15, Charles Winninger, playing Captain Andy Hawkes, walked out onto the stage and explained to the audience that the company would perform the show in its entirety that night, and that cuts would then be made according to how they, the audience, reacted to it. Of course, this instantly gave everyone sitting in the theatre that night a vested interest in this epic story, and they stayed with it right up until it rang down at midnight. Next morning, as Ziegfeld anxiously made his way to the National Theatre, he was greeted by every producer's dream vision of people queuing from the box office right down the street and back round it again. The reviews for Showboat were ecstatic, and he grudgingly admitted, "I guess we made it." By the time they reached Philadelphia, Kern and Hammerstein had managed to cut 3 scenes and 8 songs. News of this show's great success out of town had most definitely reached New York, and expectant theatregoers were busy buying up tickets for the princely sum of $5.50 and readiness for the all-important Broadway premiere on the evening of Tuesday the 27th of December 1927. And just to give you a little context to the price of the ticket, that $5.50 is the equivalent to just over $80 in today's money. There was a 5-second silence when the second act came down that night, but it was followed by a very reassuring, thunderous applause. The audience loved it, and Showboat was an unmitigated success. On December the 28th, 1927, the esteemed New York Times theatre critic Brooks Atkinson wrote, "The worlds of Broadway and Park Avenue and their respective wives put on their best bibs and tuckers last night and converged at Mr. Ziegfeld's handsome new playhouse on 6th Avenue. Potential song hits were as common last night as top hats. You Are in Love, I Can't Help Loving That Man, Why Do I Love You are sufficient for any show, to say nothing of Old Man River." Atkinson described the show as one of their unimpeachable skill and taste. Norma Terrace, who played Magnolia, was hailed a revelation. And the show went on to run for an impressive 572 performances. It's generally believed that Jerome Kern originally wrote the part of Joe the Stevedore, with the well-known singer and actor Paul Robeson in mind. But due to the numerous delays in production, Robeson was unavailable when they were finally ready to open, and so Jules Bledsoe was cast in his place for the premiere. But Robeson eventually got his chance to shine when Showboat transferred to London in 1928, and he was still with it for the revival in New York in 1932, when Brooks Atkinson wrote, "Mr. Robeson has a touch of genius. It is not merely his voice which is one of the richest organs on the stage. It is his understanding that gives Old Man River an epic lift. When he sings, you realise that Jerome Kern's spiritual has reached its final expression." The original production of Showboat closed at the Ziegfeld in 1929 after its remarkable 572 performances and a successful transfer to London's West End with Paul Robeson under its belt. After Broadway and London came the inevitable US tour with Paul Robeson and 3 of the National Touring Company. It was Irene Dunne, Alan Jones and Hattie McDaniel joining most of the original Broadway cast to star in an acclaimed Universal Studios film version. It was in 1936 and it was directed by James Whale. With the perfect lyric soprano voice, Kentucky-born Irene Dunne had been everyone's only choice to play Magnolia. Having studied at the Chicago Musical College, she then embarked on a career in Broadway musicals, allegedly landing her job in Showboat after Florence Ziegfeld saw her in a lift one day and sent his secretary off around the building to find the girl in the blue hat. In writing the screenplay for the 1936 film, Oscar Hammerstein set about developing Magnolia's storyline to show her successful singing career and her daughter's Broadway debut. He also made much more of the part of Joe the Stevedore and added in a particularly fine song, I Still Suits Me, for Robeson to sing to Queenie on board the Cotton Blossom. And although the 1936 film version is the best loved by critics, the 1951 MGM Technicolor film version is perhaps the best known film to us these days, starring Katherine Grayson, Ava Gardner, Howard Keel. It also starred the legendary lineup of Joe E. Brown, Marge and Gower Champion, William Warfield and Agnes Moorehead, who, by the way, magically played the part of Endora in the enchanting 1960s television series Bewitched. The 1951 film kept many of the original songs from the stage show and went on to become the most popular of the 3 films over all time and MGM's most financially successful film release of 1951. Just 14 years after Edna Ferber's book Showboat was first published, it had sold 320,000 copies in the United States, been translated into 11 different languages, was made into a hugely successful musical, a long-running radio programme, was made into 3 musical films and had firmly established itself not only in the hearts of a generation, but rightfully placed itself in musical history as the first true musical play. It's been said that the history of the great American musical can simply be measured by everything before Showboat and everything after Showboat. In those few months between reading the novel and producing their show in 1927, Jerome Kern and Oscar Hammerstein II created a very singular stepping stone on Broadway that went on to become the gateway to the great book musical, which has dominated musical theatre for the best part of a century, not just in America and on Broadway, but around the world. Right, that's it for today. Thank you so much for joining us. Next time, we've got a rather special visitor joining us in the form of Tom Kleneman, who was one of the first young actors to play the lead in Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. So he'll be talking about what it's like to audition for and actually get the part to sing the lead in a West End show while you're still at school. Can you imagine it? Anyway, I'm Lesley Ann Knight. Behind the camera is the wonder that is this show's producer and director, Katie Ridout. Hello. You can find Just Talking Musicals on Facebook, and we're lurking on Twitter as well under the name of @KnightandRidout. Oh, and don't forget to click the subscribe button for each new episode alert so you can bag the best front row seats for each new show. See you here again very soon for another instalment of Just Talking Musicals. Just talking musicals with you. Came to create a musical out of Pulitzer Prize winning author Edna Ferber's novel.